The Boogeyman, as it uses grief, scares, and a compelling performance from most of its actors, does something that very few monster movies have been able to do traditionally, but I would say it continues the precedent that was set through Barbarian, Smile, and others in terms of making horror movies about more than guts and gore. To summarize the film, it's been a little bit more than a month since Sadie and Sawyer's mom died, and unfortunately for both of them, their father Will, who happens to be a therapist, has completely checked out. He doesn't want to engage Sadie in terms of their mutual feelings of grief, and when it comes to Sawyer, she pretty much has to barter with him in order to have any type of quality time, at least meaningful time. Which is why when Sawyer, who's deeply afraid of the dark, starts to get haunted by the boogeyman, things are rather difficult for the family since, while Sadie has tried to compensate for Will checking out, she can only do but so much, and she got her own stuff going on with trying to get reacclimated to school, her friends, and all that. So, as the boogeyman continues to, what's the best way, tenderize or season, for lack of a better way of putting it, Sawyer's fear, and then eventually is able to catch on to Sadie, so comes the question of whether this family can make it out alive as the boogeyman grows hungrier for these people's souls, and it seems that between lack of access to outsiders and even the internal relationships not being that strong, whether or not they can eventually come together to take on this potentially eternal beast and win. So why is the boogeyman rated PG-13? It's because there's a handful of curse words used throughout. The monster does fling characters and is shot at with a gun, and I would even add in that it flings Sawyer, who's a child, so if children being part of the violence kind of irks you or makes you feel uncomfortable, be prepared for that. As for sexual content, there is none. And there is, in terms of miscellaneous stuff, minor drug use and a depiction of somebody hanging himself. So the first highlight for me is just the family dynamics, and I think that's because it really allows this film to feel more like a drama with horror elements rather than a horror which has a few dramatic moments. For it's very clear that there's very complex relationships going on here. Will straight out says in the movie that he was never prepared to be a single father, and with his wife suddenly dying in a car accident, it seems him checking out is his reaction to this new life that he's been thrusted into. And when it comes to Sadie, you can see that even though she's a teenager, she wants to have this connection with her dad because that's the only person who loved her mom as much, if not even more than her. And even though we say misery loves company usually in a negative context, when it comes to this situation, the misery could have brought them together and perhaps allowed for the healing to begin, which for neither party it seems to have done. And then when you throw Sawyer into the mix, when her mom died, it seems like she kind of lost her dad in a way too, since throughout the movie, and this is kind of a low point or on the fence thing, whenever Sawyer gets scared, you don't ever see Will show up. And mind you, Will's a therapist who walks out of his home, so if his daughter, or even Sadie later on in the film, is screaming or acting strange in the middle of the night, why is he not showing up? And setting aside that weird potential plot hole, it makes it so with Sawyer and her connection with Sadie, it's almost sad in a way that this little girl knows that the only person who will actually try to comfort her, who will actually be there for her, maybe even believe her about the things she's scared about, is her sister, who has to set aside her own trauma in order to basically step in for a father who has disconnected from both her and her little sister, and pretty much made her become this maternal role in the process. So the next highlight for us is going to be that we don't really get to see the boogeyman till the end. At first, the boogeyman just starts off as just a pair of eyes, kind of in the darkness, and honestly, sometimes it's hard to say whether or not the boogeyman is there or not, or else it's just, Sawyer or Sadie seeing things. And I feel like that enhances things, because if you don't know if the monster is there, it kind of allows it to kind of come into the theater with you, if you get what I mean. Like, This movie isn't so scary that you're gonna get nightmares, but it does kind of remind you and kind of put you in Sawyer's head like when you were a kid, or at least when I was a kid, and something moved or you thought something was there and you wasn't quite sure, so you covered yourself underneath the covers and pretended like it can't get you if you're underneath the covers. That's the kind of mindset that this film tries to get you in. The idea that there could be something there, but it's hard to say whether it's your eyes, really seeing something or just playing tricks on you because it can't decipher that it's not like something crawling up the wall, but it's just that small hole in the wall from the last tenant who decided to nail something in the wall. They just never patched up the hole. The final highlight comes from the sound. And like most people, when I go to the movies, half the time there's enough people in there that there's a bunch of distractions around. But what makes this especially different of an experience in watching the Boogeyman is that the Boogeyman often imitates other people's voices to try to get its victims into a sense of vulnerability, feeling safe, so that when it scares them, it can make them all the more juicier, for lack of a better way of putting it. So when it comes to these whispers, even if you're not in like a Dolby or IMAX theater, the whispers can feel like they're coming at you in different directions to the point where you're not sure if this may be that one horror movie where some asshole kid decides to scare you from behind. And not that I ever had that experience, but I keep it's like an irrational fear of mine, thinking that one day I'm going to be in a horror movie and some teenager's going to decide during a scary movie to just me for some reason. But let me just say, to get back on point, this is the kind of movie that makes you think that that may happen because the way the sound is used in order to bring about some sense of fear, it definitely, alongside the visual thing about the whole getting to Sawyer's head with seeing something but not sure it's there, it makes you feel a little bit more aware than a lot of horror movies may make you feel. With that said, because the Boogeyman tries to be a bit more of a serious film, it kind of makes it unfortunate that it still does that dumb horror movie of why are you trying to explore that weird sound over there? And this especially is true once they know the Boogeyman exists and yet they're still investigating things. Like, why would you walk towards, if not straight up taunt, danger? And because there's no comedy in this film, there's no sense of maybe you should forgive these characters because they're kind of dumb, they're young or anything, but they show they're not idiots. So for them to keep doing this over and over again and really court the Boogeyman and even antagonize him some ways, it's like, why are you doing this? Which leads to the last on the fence topic, which is just revisiting what we said before regarding where's Will during most of this. As noted, Will works from home and he barely leaves the house. And yet, as Sawyer and Sadie are teased and tortured by the Boogeyman, including in the middle of the night where the Boogeyman's most active, you don't see Will pop up, he doesn't check in, you don't even see him walking the halls or getting a midnight snack. The man is just completely absent, and unless we're supposed to eventually realize that the Boogeyman's like Freddy Krueger and he mainly attacks you in your sleep, it's hard to understand why Will is not really involved in anything that goes on until a certain point in the film. Overall, when it comes to the Boogeyman, I think it makes it clear the horror genre's desire to match the output of 2022, maybe even 2021, is definitely there, but it wants to continue the idea that when you see horror, you shouldn't think that all horror films exist in a monolith, that they all rely on blood, guts, and sex to keep the audience engaged, because there's so much more that can be looked into, especially since one of the key things about horror films is that it usually deals with people dealing with trauma, and there's more they can tap into than has been done thus far.